There's this moment that every creator faces where you have to bet everything on a version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z did it with his whole Prince of all Saiyans thing. Kanye does it every time he opens his mouth. You know, with me, I'm 18 years in and I'm still bouncing between delusions of grandeur and crippling imposter syndrome, often on the same day. So here's the question that I'm wrestling with. Are the stories that we tell ourselves the fuel that keeps us going, or are they lies to help us avoid facing reality? So today we're going to dig into the delusions of grandeur, when they help you, when they destroy you, and how to tell the difference. All right, well, this is Driven to Create. Let's get into it. Here's the thing that makes no sense to me. I can wake up feeling like I don't belong anywhere near what I'm doing. Like everyone's about to figure out like I'm some sort of fraud or something. And then by noon, a single good thing can happen. And then I'm convinced that I'm like meant to be one of the greats. Like it's a crazy like dichotomy. I don't think it's bipolar or manic or whatever, but it's this weird dance between feeling completely unqualified and then feeling completely destined for something massive. And, you know, 18 years later, it's still a struggle. It's still a daily struggle too. So I think that delusions of grandeur might actually be like a coping mechanism for whatever circumstances that we're in. You know, when reality feels like it's, I don't know, limiting or you know, whatever's going on in our lives, we create this bigger story in order to survive through it. You know, it's not really a conscious thing, and it's not really lying to ourselves, but it's almost like creating a psychological safe space. And I'm not a shrink, you know, take her for what you will, but it kind of is like a safe space to help us keep moving forward when literally everything tells us to quit, you know? And I've been thinking about it a lot, and I have this visual in my head of like the scales of Lady Liberty, you know, with one side being delusions of grandeur and the other side being, you know, imposter syndrome, something that tells you you're not enough or you don't belong or something like that. And I think that when the balance teeters towards delusion, you know, we form our identity around it as a survival mechanism. You know, this allows us to keep the stamina up when no one's watching or when the work feels pointless or we question, what are we doing? And it seems like we also like give ourselves permission by justifying the end goal. Like if I'm destined for X, then I'm allowed to do Y, even if Y is terrifying, like it helps us. But on the other hand, if the scale tips towards the opposite way to imposter land, you become paralyzed. Like you're unable to make decisions in order to make progress, and you don't move towards your goals. So there's always two sides of the coin that, you know, having the conviction and the audacity to like share this with people, especially those who are risk averse, who may not understand. Cause, you know, I used to share like my biggest goals with everyone. I thought like my conviction would be contagious, but instead you start to see that like sudden shift in their demeanor, and they look confused, and they, you know, then they're like, okay, buddy. Yeah, like I'll believe it when I see it. Or worse, they try to change your mind about something you feel so strongly about. So I've learned that there's like a super fine line between like rizzing people up with confidence, see, Gen Z there, right? And making people feel uncomfortable because they can't see what you're seeing. And you know, you see like if all the pins are getting knocked down, you know your plan's going to work. They can't see that. So when you share your delusions or your dreams too freely, people will either stop believing you entirely or they just plain tune you out. You know, even if you're making loads of progress, behind the scenes. No one ever sees that, which is why in my previous episode I was talking about, we should share more so people can understand us a little bit better. So going back to our friend Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z, here's a quick primer if you're not an anime fan, if you don't speak anime. But Vegeta's identity, his whole identity, was centered around him being the prince of all this, this alien race, and it pushes him to train like a maniac in order to be the strongest in the universe. So, looking at it objectively, like, his planet was destroyed. There's only a few Saiyans left. Was the title Prince of All Saiyans like meaningless at that point? But it was something he clung to so strongly. That was his delusion. Like, that was his whole identity. And that identity encouraged him to outwork everyone else and was matched only by Goku and his training regimen. And Goku had his own reasons for why he trained so hard. But there's something there about how the story you tell yourself determines the tenacity and vigor that you can sustain over a period of time. And it's not just about like motivation, it's about having the endurance to keep going. So when you believe you're meant for something, you can push through like the rejections and the people misunderstanding you and the months where like everything seems to hang up and plateau and it doesn't seem like you're making any movement. You're just stuck where you are. It's like the Sisyphus holding up the boulder. But the story, like it becomes the reason to keep going. And whatever that is, for the sake of this analogy, let's just call it finding your Goku. It gives you a target to hit. So if the story you tell yourself is the fuel, then finding your Goku is the engine to keep the wheels turning. So without having something or someone to measure against, your effort becomes directionless. Like, you become very scattered. So finding your Goku gives your story the direction to benchmark, against, measure the gaps in between, and kind of establish deadlines and stick to them too. But ultimately, you have to answer the question: do you genuinely love the work, or just the final goal? Like, if the title Prince of All Saiyans was never bestowed upon you, would you keep fighting? For me, I'd say yes. But having honesty with yourself helps way more than pretending. And it seems like there's like a big chicken and egg dilemma here, but are we crazy to think that we are destined for greatness? Or is it the rigid, steadfast belief that we will become great, the very reason that we can achieve it? I don't know. That'll keep the philosophers, busy for a while. But basically, does the delusion create the outcome, or does the prediction of the future success create the delusion? I honestly don't know. I'm on a quest to find out, as we all are. But what I do know is that people who seem to make it, reaching wherever they want to reach, they have this unshakable belief in themselves that borders on irrational, even when no one else, really sees it. So that leads me to the Incredible Hulk, because like, while we're nerding out today, we might as well just run the gamut. But if you're a nerd, you'll know that the Hulk's power is basically limitless as it scales with his level of anger. So the more angry he gets, the more power he commands. It gets kind of crazy with the power scaling. But like, having rage without aim smashes all the wrong things. Like, what good is power if you can't hit your target? So how does that translate for us as creatives? Well, having ambition without direction absolutely bulldozes collaborations, projects, relationships, stuff like that. When the scales like tip heavy into the delusion side. Time becomes immaterial. You tend to overpromise things. You say you'll get something done in 3 months, and it takes a year to deliver. And then comes the shame spiral, and the imposter syndrome rears its ugly head. He's just sitting there waiting. He's like, let me catch you on a bad day, because I'll get you. But your ego, it begins to slip, and you start feeling defensive. Like every note, everything feels like an attack. So you end up draining cash and goodwill from people, chasing a vision that's slowly drifting away. You put stress on those around you because your story has to be true. Your vision takes precedence over everything else, and that's not exactly healthy. So let me give you a personal example. 4 years ago, I started a crypto sock project crypto sock on the Algorand blockchain. You could link NFTs to, wearable apparel and scan them with your iPhone to verify the ownership. So at the time, I thought I was creating something so innovative, so ahead of its time, that I spent an entire year building it. Like the apps, the designs, the branding, everything. Like I poured my heart into it, like my whole heart. But the problem was that I was so locked into my vision of bridging the physical with the digital that I ignored literally every signal from the market that was, telling me like, don't do this. Please stop. Like, no one wants this. It's a cool idea. Maybe I don't get the sock part, but like, whatever. But long story short, it put a lot of strain on my relationships. I was putting so much time into it. I was putting less time into finding more work. Like, I was still doing work, but I was putting less time into it. It was almost like I was Ben from Parks and Rec when he was, obsessing over his little stop motion thing that was like 3 seconds long and building his board game.
You are wildly, insanely depressed.
Depressed? I'm the furthest thing from depressed. I mean, look at what I've accomplished.
So I essentially became the Hulk.
I Hulk smashed through logic, feedback, reason.
All because my anger at being like misunderstood felt more real than the possibility that I was wrong. So for the record, I respect all the work that I put into that project because I came away with so much knowledge. Like I came away a new artist after doing it. But it goes to show that giving in to the delusions of grandeur leads to a whole slew of problems. Okay, so now let's break things down so we can reassemble them into something more constructive and positive, because I do think there's a lot of positives that we can take away. But I think being able to identify like when you go towards each side of the scale is probably a good thing. So I would say that the first point is when you're erring more towards delusion, when delusion gets destructive, you end up preaching way more than you practice. I think that's a big thing. Like I said before, every critique you receive becomes an attack. Like, you might make the excuse like, oh, they don't get my vision, or they're not thinking deeply enough. I've thought about it. You should be able to have the capacity to hear what people are saying, process that, and kind of incorporate some notes. You don't have to like listen blindly to people, but really listen to people when they're given notes, and recycle or reuse or whatever. And when you're playing it too safe, so I would say when imposter syndrome like really takes hold of you, you're almost too afraid to make any moves. So you tend to only take projects that you can ace, with your current skill set. You're playing it way too safe. Like you're also afraid of public embarrassment or criticism, and you don't pursue it. I think that was the biggest thing for me for the longest time, of like putting yourself out there. Is you're afraid people are going to hate you. And most people don't want that, And another thing that comes to mind when you're playing it too safe is like you quit before you even begin. You know, like you might like chalk it up to having standards or whatever, and you're like, oh, well, I want it to be this perfect thing before I even start, or why do it if it's not going to be what it's just an excuse. You're playing it way too safe. You have imposter syndrome. You need to tame that sucker and move back to the center. You know, I'm beginning to realize that maybe it's not about eliminating the delusions or those creeping tentacles of imposter syndrome. Maybe it's more about like managing the dosage of each. It's like when there's too much of one, you need to tame it with a little bit of, other. Because imposter syndrome is great at humbling. And then delusions of grandeur are great at like expanding your horizon, showing, like what could be possible. I think that's an amazing thing with artists and creatives is like we create things out of nothing. Like we can do the insane. We're allowed to. We're encouraged. So, let the delusions guide the story to stretch you, and then let the evidence from like the real hard evidence from imposter syndrome steer you like on target and keep you grounded, keep your feet planted. So here's my final thought that I'll leave you with. We should ask ourselves, what is the smallest step I can take this week that moves me toward my goal? That still honors the big picture, the big story that I've told myself. What is the smallest thing I can do this week? So, with that, this might be a quick one, but I just wanted to thank you for following along. This episode was a difficult one to kind of put together. It's often harder to manage a sober mind than actually doing the work, like taming back these demons that are kind of like just haunting you and stuff. You spend a lot of energy on it. And, once you get into the flow with creative work like that's easy. That comes naturally. You do it enough and it just comes naturally. But, as always, if this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with one friend. Maybe it's something that they can benefit from and make their day better, or, take a step towards being more self-actualized. You're not alone in the struggle. I remind myself that all the time, even if it does feel that way. But like, comment, and subscribe, and always be creating. All right, this is Driven to Create. Talk to you soon.